A pharmacist called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said four words that split my life into a before and an after. You need to see something. My name is Walter Hensley. I am 66 years old, and for 38 years, I ran the largest commercial roofing company in 3 counties, starting with one ladder, one truck, and a debt so large it kept me awake most nights of my 30s. I built that company so my wife Carol and my daughter Lindsay would never have to know what it felt like to choose between rent and groceries the way I had growing up. But sitting in my den that afternoon, staring at a stack of unpaid caterer invoices from Lindsay's engagement party, I had no idea I was about to learn that 4 decades of sacrifice had made me worth more dead than alive to the two people I trusted most. The call came in while I was refilling my blood pressure prescription, the same one I'd been on for 6 years. Renata, the pharmacist who'd filled that same bottle 100 times, asked me to come to the store in person instead of just picking up at the drive-thru. She said it quietly, like she didn't want anyone else in the store to hear her. I told Carol I was running out for milk. I don't know why I lied. Some part of me, some old logistics brain instinct that had kept my company alive through 2 recessions, told me not to say where I was really going. The back office of the pharmacy smelled like cardboard and hand sanitizer. Renata didn't waste time with small talk. She pulled up a screen showing my prescription history and turned the monitor toward me. 3 refills over the last 4 months had been picked up not by me, but by someone using my ID number through the automated kiosk, and the dosage on 2 of those refills had been quietly adjusted upward by a doctor's electronic order I had never approved. She said the increase wasn't dangerous on its own, but combined with something else, it could be. She'd noticed because the insurance flagged an unusual interaction warning that never should have triggered for a man my age with my health profile. I asked her what the something else might be. She said she couldn't know for certain, but she strongly suggested I get my blood tested somewhere my family didn't control. And soon, I sat in my truck in that parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself turn the key. My hands weren't shaking, not yet. I was doing what I'd always done when a shipment went missing or a client tried to shortchange an invoice. I was running numbers, checking timelines, looking for the hole in the story. 4 months ago was exactly when Lindsay's fiancé, Preston, had moved into our guest house. 4 months ago was also when Carol had started handling my pill organizer herself, insisting it was one less thing for me to worry about, since I'd had what she called a rough couple of months. I hadn't noticed I'd had a rough couple of months. That was the first crack in the floor. I drove to an urgent care clinic 40 minutes away, in a town where nobody knew my name, and paid cash for a full blood panel. The nurse there, a stranger with no reason to lie to me, asked if I'd been taking any new medications, because my levels showed early markers of kidney strain that didn't match my history at all. I told her I hadn't changed anything. She said sometimes an elevated dose of a common blood pressure medication, taken alongside certain over-the-counter supplements, could do exactly this kind of quiet damage over time, damage a family doctor might mistake for simple aging if nobody looked closely. She wrote down 2 names of supplements to ask about. I recognized one of them instantly. It was in the daily vitamin pouch Carol had started leaving by my coffee mug every single morning. The drive home was the quietest 50 minutes of my life. I did not turn on the radio. I analyzed the situation the way I used to analyze a failing supply contract, coldly, without emotion, looking only for leverage. They did not want a dead husband. A sudden death would trigger an autopsy, a police report, a freeze on every account tied to my name while the estate crawled through probate for a year or more. What they wanted was a slow, deniable decline. Something a family doctor would sign off on without a second thought. Something that would make a judge hand my signature over to somebody else long before I ever stopped breathing. I walked into my own kitchen that evening, and Carol was standing at the counter exactly where she always stood, holding out my little pill pouch with a soft smile that I had believed for 34 years of marriage. "Don't forget your vitamins, Walt," she said, the way she'd said it every morning for the last 4 months. I picked it up. I felt its weight in my palm. Preston was at the table scrolling through his phone, and Lindsay was beside him. And the second I stepped into the room, their conversation went quiet. In that particular way, a room goes quiet when everyone in it is thinking about you and pretending not to. I opened the pouch like I always did, tilted it toward my mouth, and then let my elbow catch the edge of the fruit bowl. Carol kept on the island. The bowl toppled. Apples rolled across the floor and the pouch fell from my fingers, scattering the capsules under the refrigerator where no one could easily retrieve them. "Clumsy old fool," I muttered, playing embarrassed, playing tired. Preston was up out of his chair fast, faster than a man just checking his phone should move, and he got down on the floor and swept up every visible capsule with his bare hand before I could even bend down to help. Lindsay didn't move to help him. She just watched me, and for 1/2 of 1 second, before she caught herself, I saw something in her face that wasn't concern. It was calculation. That night I lay in bed next to the woman I had married in a rented church hall with borrowed shoes, and I understood I could not eat another meal or swallow another pill inside my own house until I knew exactly what was happening to me. I did not confront anyone. I did not raise my voice. Confrontation gets you contradicted, gets you gaslit, gets you told you're imagining things, gets you scheduled for a concerned doctor's visit that ends with your own signature being used against you. What I needed instead was proof, the kind that couldn't be explained away in a kitchen argument. So the next morning I told Carol I had a materials meeting at the warehouse, and instead I drove to see an old friend named Dale, a man I'd worked security contracts with back when my company still poured its own concrete. Dale ran a small surveillance supply business out of a strip mall unit that smelled like solder. I told him I needed to hear conversations happening in rooms I wasn't standing in. He didn't ask why. He just handed me 3 small voice-activated recorders, no bigger than a shirt button, and told me how long the batteries would last. I waited until Carol left for her Wednesday hair appointment, and Preston went out for his afternoon run, the same run he took at the same time every single day, predictable as a freight schedule. I planted one recorder under the kitchen island where the coffee got made every morning. I planted the second behind the family photos on the living room shelf, angled toward the couch where Carol and Lindsay liked to sit and talk in low voices when they thought I was in my workshop. The third I pressed into the underside of the passenger seat in Carol's sedan, the car she and Lindsay took together almost every day for errands. Neither of them ever fully explained to me. That night I told them my stomach was upset and skipped dinner entirely. Nobody argued with me. Nobody offered me tea. Nobody even asked if I wanted crackers. I sat alone in my workshop with a pair of old contractor headphones and downloaded the day's audio onto a laptop. I hadn't shown anyone in years, one I still use for private company records from back before I sold controlling interest in the roofing business to my longtime foreman. The kitchen recording from that afternoon came through clean. Preston's voice first, tight with frustration. The dosage still isn't doing what the doctor said it would. His labs from yesterday should have been worse than that. Carol's voice answered him, and it wasn't the voice I married. It was flat, businesslike, the voice of a woman closing on a house she wanted at a fair price. He's 66, Preston, not 86. It takes time. The doctor said we need 6 more months of steady dosing before the cognitive markers show up clearly enough for a judge to sign off on guardianship without a fight. Lindsay's voice, my daughter's voice, cut in from somewhere closer to the microphone. We don't have 6 months. The venue deposit for the wedding is non-refundable if we don't pay the balance by the 15th, and Preston's business partner is threatening to pull out of their restaurant deal if he can't show proof of capital by next month. We need Dad declared incapacitated before then so we can access the trust. I sat there in my own workshop with sawdust still on my boots, listening to my only child talk about my mind the way you'd talk about an insurance claim. Carol's voice again, calmer, colder. Then we increase it. Just enough to get the tremor showing up in his hands. Enough that when Dr. Feld sees him next, it's obvious. We are not doing anything that leaves a mark, Lindsay. We are not doing anything that shows up on a coroner's table. We just need him declared unfit. Once the power of attorney transfers, the business proceeds. The retirement accounts, the house, all of it becomes ours to manage. He doesn't have to die. He just has to disappear a little, in a way nobody questions. I removed the headphones and set them down on my workbench very carefully, the way you set down something that might shatter. My chest didn't hurt. My hands didn't shake. What I felt instead was a terrible, clean clarity, the same feeling I used to get standing over a bid that I already knew. Before I even opened it, I had lost. They did not want to kill me. They wanted to bury me alive inside my own mind, while the machinery of my life kept running without me in it. I thought about the 31 years I'd spent teaching Lindsay to read a balance sheet at this very workbench, believing I was raising someone who would understand what it cost to build something real. I thought about Carol at 26, sitting beside me in a rusted-out pickup truck in a Sears parking lot, telling me she didn't care that we had nothing, because she believed in me. I did not cry. I had already cried everything I had the day the recording ended, and the silence in my workshop settled in around me like snow. The next morning, I called my attorney, a sharp, quiet man named Otis Bramwell, who had handled every contract dispute my company ever faced and never lost one. I did not tell him everything over the phone. I told him only that I needed an emergency meeting, and I told him to bring paper, not a laptop, because I did not trust any device connected to a network I didn't personally control. We met before sunrise in his office above the old hardware store downtown, the kind of building with creaky floors and a coffee maker older than his paralegal. I played him the audio. I watched a man who had spent 30 years unmoved by hostile depositions go completely still in his chair. When the recording finished, he didn't say he was sorry. He said, "Walter, do you understand what they are trying to do to you legally? This isn't a family dispute. This is a coordinated effort to seize guardianship over a living person for financial gain. If they succeed, you will lose the right to make your own medical decisions, financial decisions, even where you're allowed to live. And once a judge signs that order, undoing it can take years, if it can be undone at all." I told him I understood exactly what they were trying to do, and I told him I intended to make sure it happened to nobody, ever, at their hands, and that in the process I intended to hand the state everything it needed to put them away for a very long time. Otis spent the next 2 hours explaining what he called a capacity defense, a legal maneuver used mostly for elderly business owners under siege from predatory relatives. We would not fight them directly yet. Direct resistance would only accelerate their timeline and make them more careless, more dangerous, more willing to skip the slow decline plan and do something faster and more permanent. Instead, we would let them believe they were winning, right up until the moment their own greed handed the state an open and shut criminal case. The heart of the plan was simple, and, Otis said, nearly impossible to challenge in court. Every legitimate legal document I had signed for 40 years carried my full name. Walter Aldous Hensley, always with the middle name spelled out in full, because an old business partner had once told me a full legal name looked more trustworthy on a contract. What almost nobody outside my accountant and my late father knew was that I had a second legal middle name buried on my original birth certificate from a county records office 2 states away, one I had dropped from every document since I was 18. Otis filed an emergency sworn declaration with the state, a legal record establishing that I was currently the target of coordinated financial elder abuse and establishing a duress signature protocol. From that moment forward, any legal document bearing my full 3-name signature, using that buried second middle name, would be automatically flagged as coerced and void the instant it touched a bank system or a courthouse database. It was a silent alarm hidden inside my own handwriting. I drove home that morning with the sun barely over the tree line, feeling for the first time in days like I was standing on solid ground instead of a floor rigged to collapse. I did not have long to enjoy it. 2 days later, Preston appeared at my workshop door, holding a leather folder against his chest the way you'd hold a shield. "Walt, I hate to bring this to you right now," he said, his voice pitched to sound apologetic, "but the venue for the wedding is threatening to cancel the whole date unless we get the deposit finalized today. There's some paperwork releasing funds from the joint family account for the balance. Lindsay's a wreck about it. Can you just sign where I've marked it? I'll walk it straight to the bank myself." He held the folder open to me, his thumb pressed firmly over the header of the page, the way a man presses a thumb over something he doesn't want you to read. I looked down anyway. Beneath his thumb, I could make out enough of the dense legal formatting to recognize what it actually was. Not a venue deposit release. A financial power of attorney, drafted to hand control of every account bearing my name directly to Lindsay, with Preston listed as secondary authorized signer. My hand did not shake when I took the pen from him. I signed the first line the way I had signed 10,000 contracts before it, the familiar sweep of my first name. Then, deliberately, precisely, I wrote out my full legal middle name in full, the one buried in a county office 2 states away, the one nobody in that house had ever seen on paper. Walter Aldous Hensley. I signed it twice more on the following pages, exactly where his thumb had left space, and I handed the folder back to him with a tired smile. He thanked me too quickly and left too fast. Practically jogging to his car, the folder pressed against his ribs like something he'd stolen. He had no idea he was carrying a piece of paper that was now, in the eyes of the state, physical evidence of an attempted crime. That evening at dinner, Carol set a mug of chamomile tea in front of me with the same warm, practiced smile she'd been wearing all month. "You've seemed stressed lately, Walt," she said. "This will help you sleep." I thanked her, brought it halfway to my lips, and felt every eye at that table land on my hand the way vultures land on a fence line before a storm finishes killing something. I set the mug down without drinking, claiming the smell reminded me too much of a tea my late mother used to force on me as a boy, and excused myself to bed early. I heard Carol's voice trail after me down the hallway, thin with irritation she was trying hard to disguise as concern. 3 nights after that, Lindsay came to me with red eyes and a folder of her own, this one thinner, softer around the edges from being carried and recarried. "Dad," she said, and her voice cracked in a way that almost made the old floor of my heart give out beneath me. "Preston and I want to take you up to the lake house this weekend. Just the three of us. No stress, no work talk. I feel like I haven't really talked to you in months and I miss you." She reached out and took my hand, and for one terrible moment, I wanted so badly to believe her that I nearly did. The lake house sat 2 hours north on a gravel road that lost cell signal a mile before you ever reached the driveway. I had bought that property 15 years earlier as a retreat, a place to fish and think and get away from invoices. Now my own daughter was inviting me to the one place on earth where nobody could hear me if something went wrong. I told her that sounded wonderful, and I meant every syllable of it as the performance it needed to be. I spent the morning before we left locking myself in my workshop under the excuse of securing the tools, and instead I called Otis on a prepaid phone Dale had sold me along with the recorders. I told him where I was going and for how long. Otis's voice went hard and fast in a way I'd never heard from him in 12 years of knowing him. "Walter, if what's in that recording is accurate, taking you somewhere with no signal and no witnesses is not a coincidence. It's an opportunity. I'm alerting the county sheriff's office right now and requesting they stage near that access road under the pretense of a wellness check. Do not, under any circumstances, consume anything they hand you up there. Not water, not coffee, nothing you didn't open yourself." I packed my old fishing duffel, the same canvas bag I'd carried on every trip for 2 decades, and inside the lining, in a hidden compartment I had sewn in myself years ago after a break-in scare at a job site, I placed a small satellite communicator Dale had thrown in as an afterthought, the kind hunters carry into dead zones in case of emergencies. The drive up was quiet, filled with classical music Carol chose because she said it would settle my nerves. Preston kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror the way a man checks a gauge he's nervous is about to blow. Somewhere around the second hour, the paved road gave way to gravel, and I watched the signal bars on my regular phone drop, one by one, until there was nothing left but a single crossed-out icon. The lake house was cold and smelled of dust when we arrived, the way any house does after months of sitting empty. Preston carried in a case of bottled water he insisted on bringing himself, just in case the well pump's acting up again. Carol immediately busied herself in the kitchen, and within 20 minutes, she was holding out a glass of iced tea toward me with a smile so practiced it had become its own kind of confession. I took the glass. I did not drink from it. Instead, standing near the sink under the excuse of getting a paper towel for a spill I created on purpose, I switched my full glass for the identical empty one, already sitting by the drain board, tipping the tea down the drain while the water ran loud enough to cover the sound. I turned back around holding an empty glass and thanked her for hitting the spot. That night, after everyone believed I had gone up to bed early, exhausted from the drive, I sat in the dark hallway outside the guest bedroom Preston and Lindsay were staying in, my back against the cool plaster wall. And I listened. "He drank the tea and nothing," Preston hissed, low and furious. "The doctor swore this batch was stronger." "Then we don't wait for a batch," Carol's voice answered. And it was Carol's voice, my wife's voice, carrying none of the warmth I had built 34 years of memory around. "Tomorrow morning before we head back, we tell him the doc needs checking after the storm last month. Preston, you take him down there alone. The water's still high and cold enough this time of year that if an older man in poor health happened to lose his footing off that dock, nobody up here would question it for a second. No autopsy flags a drowning as anything but a drowning, especially not for a man his doctor has already documented as having balance and cognitive issues." I sat against that wall in the dark and felt something inside me go very still and very cold, the way still water goes right before it freezes solid. They were done waiting for a slow decline. They had decided in the space of one bad batch of tea to simply drown me and call it an accident. I did not sleep that night. I lay fully dressed on top of the covers, listening to the house settle, running the math the way I used to run a bid at 3 in the morning before a deadline. I had the duress protocol locked into every legal document Preston had already carried back into town. I had the recordings. What I did not have yet was proof of intent to physically harm me, The one thing that would turn a financial fraud case into an attempted murder charge severe enough to guarantee neither of them ever set foot near my grandchildren, should Lindsay ever have any, without a supervised visit and a judge's signature. In the gray hour just before sunrise, I pulled the small satellite communicator out of the hidden lining of my duffel bag and pressed the single button Dale had shown me. It didn't call anyone. It sent a location ping and a preset alert message straight to Otis's phone. Emergency. Confirm. Not a drill. Then I tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, where it sat against my chest like a second heartbeat. By 7, Preston was knocking on my door, chipper and rehearsed, saying he needed a second set of hands checking storm damage on the dock before we packed up. I told him I'd be right down, and I took my time lacing my boots, giving Otis's ping every extra minute I could buy. The dock stretched out over water that was, even in daylight, a flat, dark, uninviting gray, choppy from an overnight wind. Preston walked ahead of me, pointing out a cracked board near the far end, his voice a little too loud, a little too enthusiastic about a rotted plank that, in truth, barely mattered. I walked slowly behind him, feeling the old wood flecks under my boots, feeling the cold coming up off the water like breath from an open freezer. "Right here, Walt," he said, crouching down at the very edge, gesturing for me to come look. "See how it's split? I think the whole end section's compromised." I stopped 3 feet short of him. "Preston," I said, and something in my voice must have carried more steel than he expected, because his head came up fast. "How much is my life worth to you? Enough for a wedding deposit? Enough to save your restaurant deal?" His face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. Confusion, calculation, and then, when he understood I wasn't confused, wasn't drugged, wasn't the tired old fool he'd been managing for 4 months, something closer to panic. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, standing up too fast, the dock swaying under both of us. "I have Carol on tape," I said, planning exactly this. This dock, this morning, a cold, wet accident nobody would ever question. I let that sit in the air between us, watching it land. "You have a choice right now, son. You can push and go to prison for the rest of your natural life for a murder you actually completed, or you can walk back up to that house with me and let the people who are already on their way handle the rest of it." His hand shot out and grabbed the front of my jacket. Not to push me, I think, but out of pure animal panic, the reflex of a drowning man grabbing anything solid. That was the moment the first patrol vehicle came down the gravel drive behind the house. No siren, just the low crunch of tires and the flash of a light bar cutting through the morning mist, because Otis had done exactly what he promised and gotten the county involved the moment my alert came through. Carol came running out onto the porch in her bathrobe, and I will remember the sound she made for the rest of my life. A sound that started as a scream for help and ended when she saw the deputies walking toward the dock instead of toward some imagined intruder, as something closer to a wail of pure, cornered fury. They took Preston off that dock in handcuffs while his boots were still wet from the mist. Lindsay came apart on the porch steps the second an officer approached her, sobbing that it wasn't her idea, that Preston had found the doctor, that Preston had gotten the pills adjusted, that she'd only gone along with it because she was terrified of losing him and terrified of the debt he'd already put them both in. She traded every scrap of loyalty she had left in less time than it takes to boil an egg. Carol did not confess. Carol stood on that porch in her bathrobe with her arms crossed and told the responding officers, calm as a woman discussing weather, that her husband had been suffering from paranoid delusions for months, that this whole scene was proof of exactly the cognitive decline doctor. Feld had already documented that I was the one who needed help, not them. It might have worked if Otis hadn't already been on a conference call with the state's Elder Abuse Task Force the moment my alert went out, walking them in real time through the audio recordings, the pharmacy records, and the forged financial documents now sitting, void and flagged, in a bank's fraud department 3 counties away. By the time the deputies finished separating the 3 of them into 3 different vehicles, Otis's voice came through on the responding sergeant's phone, calm and final, laying out exactly which documents to seize from the house and exactly which financial accounts to freeze before anyone could touch them. I stood on that dock a long time after the vehicles pulled away, watching the gray water ripple under a sky just starting to clear, and I felt nothing like triumph. I felt like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten his own shoulders were capable of standing up straight. The trial, when it finally came 7 months later, was quieter than I expected. Preston pleaded down to a lesser charge in exchange for cooperating fully against Carol, admitting under oath that the medication scheme had been his idea, sourced through a doctor he'd once done contracting work for who owed him a favor and a debt. He received 9 years. Carol fought every charge with the same cold composure she'd shown on that porch, right up until the jury came back on the attempted murder count, at which point, for the first time in 34 years of marriage, I watched every ounce of composure leave my wife's face at once. She received 14 years, the extra weight coming down hardest on the financial elder abuse counts, the state having taken a particular righteous interest in prosecuting cases exactly like mine to the fullest extent the law allowed. Lindsay avoided prison entirely by cooperating early and completely, but the court ordered restitution that stripped every asset Preston had ever put in her name, and the state's Family Services Division placed permanent restrictions on her handling any financial matters connected to me ever again without independent court oversight. I have not spoken to my daughter since the sentencing. I am told she now works retail in a town 2 states away, under her maiden name. I sold the house within a month of the verdict. I didn't want the money from it in any account connected to my old life. I put nearly all of it into the roofing company's employee ownership trust, the same one I'd started building the year I finally made partner with my old foreman, a steady, decent man named Curtis who had swept floors for me at 19 and never once, in 26 years, asked me for anything he hadn't earned. I handed him full control the same month the trial ended. Loyalty built on shared sweat, I've learned, outlasts loyalty bought with comfort every single time. These days, I live in a small cabin on 11 acres about 90 minutes from the nearest town. Land I bought with cash under a name that isn't hard to find if you look, but hard enough that nobody has bothered. I make my own coffee every morning in a dented percolator that's older than my marriage was. Nobody stands behind me while I drink it, watching my hands for a tremor that isn't real. Nobody hands me a mug with a smile that's a lie wearing a warmer face. I still fish that same lake sometimes, on a different dock, on a different shoreline, far enough from the old house that the water doesn't carry any memory of that gray morning at all. I sit out there most evenings now, and I think about 40 years of invoices and ladders and cold mornings on job sites, and I think about how close I came to spending the last chapter of that story locked inside a mind that had never actually failed me, watched over by 2 people who had already spent it in their heads 100 times before I ever knew I was for sale. I am 67 years old now. My hands are steady, my mind is clear, and for the first time since I was a young man standing in a Sears parking lot with nothing but a rusted truck and a woman who told me she believed in me, I answered to no one but myself.